Hello everyone, I am Mr. Knight. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you drift off to sleep or perhaps while you are unwinding after a long day. So before we dive deep into the heavy, emotional waters of tonight's stories, I'd love for you to leave a quick comment, letting me know where in the world you are tuning in from. It is always fascinating to see how we are all connected through these stories, no matter the distance between us. And if you find these narratives engaging, please do consider liking and subscribing. It helps immensely. Alright, now let's get comfortable. Take a deep breath, and allow the world to fade away as we dive into tonight's cases. There is a unique kind of pain that comes with uncertainty, a hollow ache that no words can erase. It is a grief that follows loved ones for the rest of their lives, a shadow that stretches long and cold. We begin with a story that started like any other ordinary day but ended in a nightmare that would grip a community and test the limits of forensic science. It is a story of a young girl named Sierra Lamar, whose life was full of promise and friendship, and a predator who thought he could commit the perfect crime. But as you will hear, the physical world remembers what the mind tries to forget. Sierra Lamar was the kind of girl who lit up a room. Born in October 1996, she grew up in Fremont, California, surrounded by the chaotic love of a large family. As she transitioned into her teenage years, Sierra created what looked like an ideal life. She was a freshman in high school, bursting with energy, and she joined the cheerleading team. She surrounded herself with a close-knit group of friends who meant everything to her. In those years, friendships define your world, and Sierra had found a place where she truly belonged. In every photo from that period, you see its arms wrapped around one another. Constant, genuine smiles, always side by side. She appeared genuinely happy, a beacon of youth and vitality. But life is rarely simple, and October 2011 became a profound turning point for Sierra. A court decision mandated that she live full-time with her mother, Marlene, who was preparing to move from Fremont to Morgan Hill, roughly 35 miles away. To an adult, driving 35 miles might seem trivial, but for a 15-year-old girl whose entire world revolved around her friends, her school, and the familiar streets she knew, it felt like an exile to a foreign planet. The reason behind the judge's ruling was troubling but necessary to understand the depth of the changes in Sierra's life. Her father, Steve, had been discovered behaving inappropriately toward one or more of her friends during a sleepover. He was arrested and formally charged. In response, Marlene divorced him, seeking to rebuild their lives far from the scandal and emotional damage left behind. Sierra's older sister, already 19 and legally an adult, was free to decide where she wanted to live. Sierra, only 15, was not. So, in October 2011, Sierra and her mother relocated to Morgan Hill. Sierra did her best to adjust. She joined the cheerleading squad at her new school, forcing a smile and trying to build a new life. She began forming new friendships, but those who knew her best could sense the fracture beneath the surface. She confided in friends that she sometimes thought about finding a way to move back. Whether that was a genuine plan or simply the venting of a lonely teenager, we will never truly know. Adding to the complexity of her new life, Marlene had begun a new relationship with a man named Ricky, and the two were now living together. On the morning of March 16, 2012, the sun rose over Morgan Hill just like any other day. Nothing appeared out of the ordinary. Around 6 in the morning, Marlene stepped into Sierra's bedroom to check that she was awake and getting ready for school. Sierra was already up, moving about her room, preparing to get dressed. Marlene handed her $5 for lunch, told her she loved her, and then left for work. She walked out the door, never imagining those would be the final words she would ever speak to her daughter. At 6:57, Marlene sent Sierra a text reminder to wipe down the bathtub before heading out. Moments later, she sent another message asking whether Sierra planned to meet a friend after school. Sierra didn't reply. For a teenager, this isn't unusual, but for a mother, it would later become a haunting silence. Investigators know she saw the messages because at 7:11 a.m. Sierra sent a text to a friend about bringing some things to school. The items were mundane homework and makeup, the kind of everyday coordination typical for a teenage girl. That 7:11 message, however, would become critically important. It was the last verified communication Sierra had with anyone. More importantly, it showed intent. She intended to go to school that day. She wasn't planning to disappear or run away. She was simply facing another ordinary Friday. Sierra's bus stop was less than half a mile from her home, located at the corner of Palm Avenue and Doty Avenue. The bus arrived every morning at exactly 7:25 a.m. to catch it. Sierra usually left the house around 7:10. Investigators believe she followed that same routine on the morning she vanished, but when investigators later reviewed the grainy footage from the school bus camera, It confirmed a detail that sent chills down their spines. Sierra never boarded the bus. That discovery narrowed the timeline to an alarmingly small window of just 14 minutes, from her final text at 7:11 to the bus's arrival at 7:55. Somewhere within that brief span, along a quiet rural stretch with no surveillance cameras and no known witnesses, Sierra Lamar disappeared. When Marlene finished work at 3:45 that afternoon, she called Sierra, just as she did every day. There was no answer. She tried again and again, 7 more calls over the next hour. By the time Marlene arrived home and found the house empty, the silence was deafening, and her instincts told her something was terribly wrong. She rushed to the high school, desperate, and even contacted her ex-husband back in Fremont. No one had seen Sierra at 6 p.m. An email from the school confirmed what Marlene had been dreading since the moment the phone went to voicemail. Sierra had never shown up to a single class that day. Marlene placed a frantic 911 call, pleading for an Amber Alert to be issued, but investigators told her Sierra didn't meet the criteria. They never clearly explained why. It is one of the most frustrating aspects of cases like this, how often alerts are denied, even when a child is obviously missing. Standards that can feel arbitrary in hindsight often delay the critical hours when a child is most likely to be found. As in many disappearances, authorities initially considered the possibility that Sierra had run away. She had told friends she wasn't happy in Morgan Hill, but her parents knew that wasn't who she was. And importantly, the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office treated the situation as serious from the very beginning. Search teams began canvassing the area immediately, but from the very first moments, the terrain turned the investigation into a logistical nightmare. Morgan Hill is a place where suburban neighborhoods abruptly give way to vast stretches of farmland. It is the kind of place where civilization fades quickly. From Sierra's house, a 5-minute walk could take you from residential streets into endless strawberry fields, mile-long apple orchards, and thick walnut groves where visibility drops to just a few feet. Detective Jeff Smith later compared it to searching for a needle in 1,000 haystacks without even knowing which haystack to start with. The bus stop at Palm Avenue in Doty was especially remote. One corner was marked by an abandoned barn, used for years. Another bordered a drainage ditch running alongside an orchard. There were no gas stations, no corner stores, not even a nearby home with a doorbell camera that could have captured something. The closest business was a roadside fruit stand nearly 3/4 of a mile away, and it didn't open until 9 a.m. It was a perfect place for a predator. Then, less than a day after Sierra disappeared, investigators noticed something unusual with her phone. The deputy who had taken the missing person report had tried calling it throughout the first night, but every call went straight to voicemail. But at 3:48 a.m. on March 17th, that suddenly changed. The phone powered on. When authorities traced the signal, they saw the device flickering on and off for just seconds at a time. Sierra's Samsung Galaxy had been lying on damp ground only a few blocks from her bus stop. Moisture had seeped into the battery, causing brief false charges, enough to turn the phone on momentarily, send a signal to a cell tower, and then shut down again. The phone had been lying there the entire time, discarded almost immediately after Sierra was taken. 2 days later, on March 18th, search teams made an even more unsettling discovery. In a field roughly 2 miles from where Sierra vanished, her juicy couture bag was found wedged between clumps of cactus. Inside the bag, her clothing was carefully folded. The black San Jose Sharks sweatshirt seen in her final selfie, her jeans, underwear, bra, socks, shoes, and even some school papers were all there. But investigators noted a detail that turned their stomachs. The jeans carried the smell of urine. To investigators, this detail pointed to a known physiological response to extreme fear. In moments of intense life-threatening stress, the body's fight-or-flight reaction can cause involuntary loss of bladder control. It suggested Sierra had been terrified. More importantly, those clothes would soon become central to the entire case. When forensic teams examined the clothing, they uncovered 3 critical pieces of evidence. The first was microscopic lichen, algae that only grows in specific environments, offering potential clues about where Sierra had been taken. The second was the presence of tiny reflective beads embedded in her jeans, the same type used in road lane markings, indicating she may have been dragged across pavement. But the third finding was the true breakthrough: foreign DNA on the jeans, specifically semen that did not belong to Sierra. On March 28, 2012, that DNA profile was entered into the CODIS database. 12 possible DNA matches were returned, but a CODIS administrator quickly ruled out 11 of them. The genetic profile pointed to a single individual, 21-year-old Antolin Garcia Torres. Investigators made the deliberate choice to keep this discovery out of the public eye. They didn't want to alert him, especially if there was still a chance that Sierra might be alive. Instead, Beginning on March 28, authorities placed Garcia Torres under round-the-clock surveillance. His phone was wiretapped, a tracking device was installed on his car, and 2 undercover officers even moved into a trailer beside his at the RV park, where he lived with his girlfriend and their child. For 6 days, investigators monitored his every move, hoping he might unknowingly lead them to Sierra. He never did. However, the surveillance uncovered something else, an insight that completely reshaped the case's timeline. The RV park where Garcia Torres lived had only one security camera, an old analog system that captured the single entrance and exit. When detectives initially reviewed footage from March 16th, they noted his red Volkswagen Jetta leaving the park at 8 a.m., a time that seemed too late for him to be involved in Sierra's disappearance. On the surface, it looked like an alibi. But that changed when Detective Sarah Chin spotted a subtle inconsistency. The shadows didn't match the dune stop in mid-March. Shadows at 8 a.m. should have been longer and cast at different angles. Instead, they resembled shadows typical of around 7 a.m. Investigators soon realized the camera's internal clock hadn't been updated for daylight saving time, which had gone into effect just 5 days earlier. The recorded 8 a.m. was actually 7 a.m. in real time. This wasn't merely a matter of an hour. It changed everything. Garcia Torres had actually left his RV park at 7 a.m., 10 minutes before Sierra sent her final text. His home sat at the intersection of Monterey and Watsonville Road, just 10.3 miles from Sierra's bus stop. On quiet rural roads at that hour, the drive would take roughly 10 to 12 minutes. The calculation was chilling. Leave home at 7 a.m., arrive near Palm Avenue by 7:10 a.m. Sierra sends her last text at 7:11 a.m., and by 7:25 a.m. the bus arrives to find her gone. The footage also captured his return at 12:58 p.m., nearly 6 hours unaccounted for. Investigators compared this with the time it would take to reach his claimed fishing spot at UVA's reservoir and return, even allowing for several hours of fishing. He should have been home no later than 10:30 a.m., so where had he been during those missing hours? On April 4th, detectives approached him casually. The conversation was short but revealing. When asked if he knew about the missing girl, Garcia Torres replied, "I would like you to get to the point." When pressed about whether he knew Sierra, he said, "I doubt it." For investigators, that was perfect. If he didn't know her, there was no innocent explanation for his DNA on her clothing. By April 7th, he was brought in for formal questioning. It was there that Garcia Torres made a series of disastrously incriminating statements. He claimed he had left home around 7:10 or 7:20 a.m. to go fishing alone at a nearby reservoir. He confessed that he'd missed his intended turn and instead driven down Palm Avenue, the very road where Sierra's bus stop was located. When the detective asked if there was any reason his DNA might appear on Sierra's belongings, he only mentioned DNA without specifying the type. Garcia Torres immediately asked, could sperm be a source of DNA? Then he launched into a bizarre and incriminating explanation. He claimed that he masturbated in his car while driving, cleaned himself with tissues, and threw them out the window. Therefore, if any sperm was found on her belongings, he argued it must have come from a tissue that somehow landed there. Importantly, the detective had never mentioned sperm, semen, or bodily fluids, only DNA. While investigating Garcia Torres further, detectives uncovered a pattern of predatory behavior. His employment records showed he had worked at a Safeway distribution center in 2009. The same year, 3 women were assaulted in that very parking lot. All cases that eventually went cold. The assaults had occurred over a 2-month period. The first victim, a 26-year-old woman leaving her night shift, was approached from behind and struck with a stun gun. She screamed, causing the attacker to flee. 3 weeks later, a second woman was not so lucky. She was tased and dragged toward a dark corner of the lot before her car alarm forced him to retreat. The third woman fought fiercely enough that he dropped his stun gun and ran. At the time, investigators had created a composite sketch based on the victim's descriptions: a Hispanic male in his early 20s with a thin mustache, approximately 5'8". The recovered stun gun was bagged and tested for fingerprints. A partial print on the battery was too smudged to match anyone in the system back in 2009. But by 2012, forensic technology had advanced significantly. When Detective Lisa Park examined the old evidence box and revisited the composite sketch, she immediately noticed a striking resemblance to Garcia Torres. The partial fingerprint that had been unreadable 3 years earlier was now enhanced with modern techniques, and it matched Garcia Torres perfectly. Investigators realized they weren't dealing with a single isolated incident anymore. They were facing someone who had been preying on women for years. A search warrant for Garcia's car uncovered the final damning evidence. Sierra's DNA on the driver's side rear door, her hair entangled in rope in the trunk, and fibers from his floor mats that matched the fibers on her sweatshirt. On May 21, 2012, Antolin Garcia Torres was arrested for kidnapping and first-degree murder. His only reaction to being handcuffed was a single, chilling word. The trial didn't begin until January 30, 2017. For 5 long years, Garcia Torres remained in jail, insisting he was innocent, while volunteer search teams never stopped looking for Sierra. Her family held vigils, released balloons, and organized searches every weekend. The community of Morgan Hill refused to give up. The defense attempted to claim that Sierra had run away. They presented a notebook containing writings that read, "I hate my life," and mentioned being in San Francisco on March 16, 2012. But a handwriting expert testified that none of it matched Sierra's handwriting. The prosecution argued that other students had written the entries as some kind of cruel joke. The evidence against Garcia Torres was overwhelming: his DNA on her clothing, her DNA in his car, his admission to being on Palm Avenue that morning, the surveillance footage tracing his movements, and his bizarre story about disposing of semen-soaked tissues. It all pointed to his guilt. On May 9, 2017, the jury convicted Antolin Garcia Torres of kidnapping and murdering Sierra Lamar. The court spared him the death penalty, instead sentencing him to life without the possibility of parole. In December 2020, a reporter received the first and only statement from Garcia Torres since his arrest. He continued to claim his innocence and refused to reveal Sierra's whereabouts. Consider the cruelty in that silence. This man knows exactly where a 15-year-old girl lies. He knows her family has spent 12 years searching tirelessly, and yet he remains silent, driven purely by malice. But the justice system, after years of painstaking work, ensured he would never hurt another soul again. While Sierra's case ended with a conviction, the search for justice in the next story is far more complex, filled with frustration, betrayal, and a father's refusal to give up. This is the story of Haley Dunn, a 13-year-old girl who vanished just 2 days after Christmas, leaving behind a community torn apart by suspicion and a family desperate for answers. It is a story about what happens when the people who are supposed to protect you become the focal point of the investigation, and how a father's determination became the only light in a very dark room. Haley Dunn was a tomboy with a love for glitter and pretty things. She was active in 3 sports and always popping over to her father's house just across the street. To provide context on the family, Haley was the daughter of Billie Jean Dunn and Clint Dunn. Although her parents had separated years earlier, Haley was living with her older brother David, her mother Billie, and her mother's boyfriend Sean Adkins. On the surface it seemed like a typical, peaceful household, but the morning of December 27, 2010, marked a turning point. Billie Jean Dunn said goodbye before leaving for a 12-hour shift, leaving Haley asleep in her bed. Sean Adkins claimed he had left even earlier, around 5:30 a.m., but had quit his job just minutes after arriving. He later told investigators that he drove to his mother's house in Big Spring and stayed there most of the day, but phone records would eventually cast doubt on that account. By 2:30 that afternoon, a cryptic text was sent from Haley's phone to one of her friends. It read only wide and short for what you're doing. The friend never responded, and Haley was never seen alive again. When Billie returned home that evening and realized her daughter was missing, she didn't panic immediately. She asked Sean where Haley had gone, and he casually said that Haley had walked over to her dad's house and was spending the night with a friend named Mary Beth. But that explanation didn't make sense. Clint Dunn, Haley's biological father who lived right across the street, hadn't seen her all day. Clint later recalled, "That was my day, and then I came home around, I guess, like 3 o'clock. When I got there, Haley was watching TV in the living room. I went into my and Billie's bedroom and Haley came in to tell me she was going to her father's house and would be staying the night with a friend. Then she left. After that I was alone for maybe an hour and then David and a friend came over. Throughout that entire day, Clint believed Haley was simply at a friend's house. When asked what time she said she was leaving, he estimated sometime between 3 and 3:30 p.m. shortly after he had arrived. "I'm not really sure about the exact time," he admitted. Clint explained that it wasn't unusual for Haley not to check in regularly. It's normal for her not to call. Usually if she stays the night at a friend's house, she'll be back the next morning. But when Billie finally reached out to Mary Beth's family, they clarified something chilling. Haley had never planned to stay with them. She hadn't even mentioned coming over. Even more alarming were the things Haley left behind. Her cell phone, her purse, and her favorite items, the small essentials she always took on even the most ordinary sleepovers, were all still sitting untouched in her room. According to Billie, Haley had simply vanished. She went door to door, asking neighbors if they'd seen her daughter walking by. even voicing fears that someone might have taken her from the street, but no one had seen anything. The following day, Billy filed a missing person report. Authorities initially classified Haley as a runaway, an assumption that would later complicate the investigation. The community, however, refused to stand idle. Neighbors, friends, and even strangers combed vacant lots, open fields, and alleyways. Clint led much of the search himself, digging through dumpsters, walking until his feet ached, and chasing every rumor, even when they led nowhere. Meanwhile, the behavior of Billy and Sean raised suspicions. Sean never participated in the searches or distributed flyers. He mostly answered questions and sat for interviews. Billy admitted she couldn't bring herself to search wooded areas, explaining that doing so felt like looking for her daughter's body. Instead, she held on to hope that Haley would simply walk back through the door. But just 4 days after Haley vanished, Billy and Sean hosted a New Year's Eve party, and for Clint, Haley's father, that decision didn't sit right at all. By January 4th, the investigation had intensified. The Texas Rangers and the FBI officially joined the search for Haley Dunn, bringing national attention and resources Colorado City had never seen. Billboards featuring Haley's bright, smiling face began appearing along highways across Texas, each one urging the public to come forward with any information. The case captured even more attention when Billie Jean Dunn appeared on The Nancy Grace Show. The interview was raw and unflinching, quickly going viral, not just because of Billy's emotional delivery, but because Nancy Grace pressed hard, scrutinizing every detail. She challenged Billy's timeline and raised pointed questions about Sean Adkins, whose name was already circulating as a possible suspect. Meanwhile, the Texas Rangers focused their efforts on Haley's home, conducting an exhaustive search. In the days following Billy's interview, Sean gave his own public statement, defending himself and insisting he loved Haley with all his heart. Yet for many viewers, his answers only fueled suspicion. "It really doesn't bother me," he said, "because my main focus is Haley. We just want her to come home safe." When asked about his relationship with Haley, he replied, "It's a really good relationship. I love her with all my heart, and I believe she loves me with all my heart. We get along just fine." But those closest to Haley painted a different picture. Police records later revealed a troubling history of domestic disputes between Billy and Sean, including at least one alarming incident just months before Haley disappeared. For neighbors, this wasn't exactly a surprise. They'd overheard the shouting through walls. Yet, what truly unsettled the community were the words Haley herself had spoken. "She used to tell me about the man," recalled one relative. When asked what she meant, the reply was clear. Haley didn't like him. She didn't trust him. She was afraid. Haley had confided in friends and family that she didn't feel safe at home. Her grandmother remembered Haley saying she sometimes saw Sean's shadow outside her bedroom door late at night, just standing there. Others noted that she seemed uneasy around him and often tried to avoid being left alone in the house. Early in the investigation, both Billie Jean Dunn and Sean Adkins were asked to account for their whereabouts. Detectives meticulously reviewed bank statements, cell phone records, and work logs. Almost immediately, Sean's story began to unravel. He initially told authorities that on the morning of December 27th he had gone to work at the Snyder manufacturing plant only to be fired. But his supervisor revealed a different version. Sean had not been fired. He had quit voluntarily, showing up at 6 a.m., handing over his uniform, and walking away. This distinction mattered. It exposed the first of many red flags. Later, when confronted, Sean admitted he had lied to avoid conflict with Billie Jean. He didn't want her to know he had walked out of a steady job, so he fabricated the firing narrative. Investigators then turned to his cell phone data, which painted an even murkier picture. Sean claimed that after leaving work he drove straight to his mother's house in Big Spring, about 50 miles away, to use her computer to file for unemployment benefits. Yet, between 6:35 and 6:56 a.m., his phone pinged towers in Colorado City, the very town where Haley lived, miles from Big Spring. If he had truly gone directly to his mother's, the pings would have tracked along the route, but they did not. Instead, the evidence suggested Sean had remained near Colorado City during a critical window when Haley was last seen alive. Later that day, Haley's older brother David returned home around 4 p.m., finding the front door locked. He climbed through a window and froze. Sean stood in the hallway with an expression of alarm like a deer caught in headlights. That evening, bank records revealed more contradictions. After Sean picked up Billy from work around 6 p.m., the couple made 2 ATM withdrawals totaling $140. Billy later claimed the money was for groceries and gas, but investigators determined it was actually spent on narcotics. Both Billy and Sean were asked to take polygraph tests, and both failed. Billy admitted she was on anti-anxiety medication. Sean, however, walked out twice. On the third attempt, he answered only 2 questions. When asked where Haley might be, he said, "Scurry County." When asked who police should look at, he replied, "Both of us." But a deeper investigation into the household uncovered something far more disturbing. Detectives discovered stacks of printed articles, hundreds of them, covering topics such as serial killers, sexual sadism, and intrafamilial violence. When confronted, Billy dismissed the discovery, claiming that she and Sean were simply fans of true crime. "Plenty of people are into true crime," she said to detectives. However, this explanation fell short. By January 12, 2011, law enforcement publicly named Sean Adkins as a person of interest. For many in Colorado City, this was no surprise. What investigators uncovered next would become one of the most damning elements of the case. During a digital forensic analysis of electronics linked to both households, law enforcement found over 100,000 illegal images of minors classified by experts as child sexual abuse material. The sheer magnitude of the collection was staggering. Some of the images were recovered from a memory stick in Billy's home, while others were found on a computer at Sean's mother's house. Among the seized evidence was a laptop that appeared central to the investigation. Shortly after police confiscated the laptop, Sean's stepfather stormed into police headquarters, demanding its return. In a shocking turn, the laptop was ultimately handed back to Sean. Many observers still regard this decision as a critical misstep. At that time, no arrests were made in connection with the illegal images. Then, in March 2013, nearly 2.5 years after Haley vanished, a hiker near Lake J.B. Thomas in Scurry County came across something deeply unsettling. Hidden among the brush were human remains. The location was chilling, just 20 miles from where Haley had last been seen. Search teams quickly swarmed to the area, and investigators meticulously collected what little evidence remained. For weeks, forensic experts worked to confirm what everyone feared. Finally, on April 26, 2013, authorities delivered the devastating confirmation. The remains were indeed those of 13-year-old Haley Darlene Dunn for Haley's family. The news hit like a thunderclap. Clint was quietly informed that Haley had likely died from blunt force trauma. Clint Dunn, however, refused to give up. He transformed his grief into relentless advocacy, organizing vigils and keeping her name alive. His persistence finally bore fruit in 2019 when a former middle school student came forward with unusual items she had discovered shortly after Haley disappeared. The most unsettling detail wasn't merely that these items had gone unnoticed. It was where they had been found. The area had already been searched multiple times by law enforcement. For Clint, this revelation was both a breakthrough and a torment. Still, their emergence breathed new life into the investigation. Around the same time, across West Texas, women came forward reporting disturbing harassment online by a man using the name Casey, Sean Adkins' middle name. A private investigator traced the digital activity back to Sean. It revealed a man who was manipulative, violent, and cruel. By 2021, momentum finally began to build. Rumors about Sean Adkins, his inconsistent alibi, and the disturbing online activity were converging. Finally, in June 2021, the breakthrough arrived. Sean Adkins was taken into custody and charged with the murder of 13-year-old Haley Dunn. The news spread rapidly. For years, his name had hovered over the case as a suspect, but now, after nearly a decade, he was finally in handcuffs. However, 2 years later, in June 2023, that uncertainty came to a head. The state moved to dismiss the charges against Sean Adkins without prejudice. District Attorney Ricky Thompson requested additional time for investigators to strengthen the case. And just like that, after 2 years behind bars, Sean Adkins walked free. For Clint, it was another devastating blow, a reminder that an arrest does not guarantee justice. Still, he refused to relent. "They're both involved," he said publicly, accusing both Sean and Billie Jean Dunn. By early 2025, the Texas Rangers Cold Case Unit had officially taken over Haley's investigation. Equipped with modern technology, they hoped fresh eyes could uncover what had been missed. For Colorado City, the renewed effort brought both hope and unease. They would be there relentlessly until true justice was finally achieved. While the fight for Haley's justice continues, our next story takes us to a quiet town where the tragedy was not a mystery, but a devastating consequence of a system's failure. This is the story of Claudia Small, a young woman whose life was cut short on her 18th birthday by a boy she trusted. It is a story about the fragility of life and the irreversible damage caused by a single reckless moment. Claudia had just turned 18, a milestone that should have been filled with joy, laughter, and celebration. But that night, her birthday night, would become a night of tragedy. Friends always said she saw the best in people. She always trusted, always believed. And yet, sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones who can hurt us the deepest. Our story begins in Wolseley, a quiet town just east of Regina. It was here that a family and a community were left stunned, struggling to comprehend the unthinkably an 18-year-old girl killed during her own birthday party. Claudia was the kind of person who stood up for what was right, someone whose sense of justice was woven into the very fabric of who she was. She was raised between Wolseley and the Carry-the-Kettle Nakota Nation in Saskatchewan, a place where everyone knew your name. Her mother often said Claudia's heart was too big, too willing to trust and forgive. Claudia would always step in for those being bullied, the ones left out, the ones who felt unseen. Everyone who knew her says the same thing. She had a rare kindness, the kind that leaves a mark on everyone around you. Even as a child, she had big dreams. She loved science, loved mysteries, and was drawn to anything that challenged her mind. Her goal was simple but powerful: to study forensic science at the University of Regina, to step into law enforcement, to bring answers to families in the darkest of times. But before any of Claudia's dreams could begin to take shape, it all ended on the very day it was meant to start. August 18, 2024, her 18th birthday. Claudia wasn't the type to throw huge parties, but birthdays are different, aren't they? That one day where you can let go a little, laugh a little louder, and feel like the world is celebrating you. So, she did what any normal 18-year-old might do. She invited a few close friends over, hoping for a simple, joyful night. No one could have imagined that by the time the sun rose, that sense of safety would be gone, because in the early hours, sometime after 3 a.m., what started as a small, friendly birthday gathering turned into a nightmare. People were winding down, talking quietly, music playing softly in the background. The calm after hours of laughter hung in the air. But in that group was a teenage boy, a face Claudia knew, someone from her circle, not a stranger. And that familiarity is what makes this story so chilling. He came from the same town, part of the same tight-knit community where everyone knew each other. He wasn't an intruder. He was someone trusted enough to be invited in. That night, he brought a firearm. One decision, one weapon, and everything changed. Why he had it, or what led to that moment, is still not entirely clear. But according to the RCMP, the gun went off inside the house. One shot. Just one. And that single sound shattered everything. Panic swept through the room. Some screamed, some froze, some rushed to help. By the time first responders arrived, it was already too late. Claudia was gone. The shock, the disbelief, it was impossible to process. In Wolseley, tragedies like this simply don't happen. Some hoped it was an accident, maybe a careless mistake with a found gun. But as the investigators dug deeper, it became clear this was no accident. The boy who fired the gun wasn't allowed to have it. He was under a firearms prohibition order, a legal restriction that forbade him from owning, carrying, or even touching a gun. Such an order isn't handed out lightly. It comes from past behavior, from demonstrated danger. And yet, somehow that rule was broken with devastating consequences. Authorities later confirmed that the boy somehow came into possession of a loaded firearm despite the court ban. Whether he borrowed it, stole it, or was handed it by someone else remains unclear. But the fact that he had it at all exposed a serious failure, a gap between the law that forbade him from having a weapon and the reality that no one was ensuring that rule was enforced. It's one of those moments when the very system meant to protect people simply did not. And what made it even more chilling was that this wasn't a case of strangers crossing paths. Claudia and the boy likely knew each other, probably saw each other around town. They shared friends, familiar faces, and a small-town circle where everyone knows everyone. He was trusted enough that nobody questioned why he was there. That's the danger of small towns. Recognition brings comfort. When you see a familiar face, you let your guard down. No one expects that person to be carrying a weapon, much less capable of taking a life. As news spread, the story ignited social media. Headlines blared across feeds. 18-year-old woman found dead after shooting in Wolseley. A quiet town had been changed forever. Those were the headlines. But for the people who truly knew Claudia, this wasn't just news. It was deeply personal. It was about a young woman who trusted too easily. A night meant for celebration and a tragedy that should never have been possible. The boy was arrested before sunrise, charged with manslaughter with a firearm along with several other weapons-related offenses. Investigators discovered he had repeatedly violated his court order, but no one had followed up. No one had made sure he wasn't armed again. It was a grim reminder of how laws can look strong on paper, yet fail entirely in practice. For Claudia's family, legal charges and explanations meant nothing. Nothing could bring her back. Her mother, Kristen, said there weren't words strong enough to describe the pain. Her twin brother Callum was silent for days, struggling to grasp how someone from their world, someone they had known for years, could take her life in a single reckless moment. And the cruelest part, Claudia wasn't in the wrong place. She was home, surrounded by people she trusted, celebrating the milestone she had waited for her entire life. She hadn't taken a dangerous risk. The danger had come to her. The tragedy of Claudia Small forces us to confront the reality that danger can come from the people we believe are safe, that the people closest to us may sometimes be the ones who put us at risk. This is a recurring theme in the stories we tell tonight, a dark undercurrent of betrayal. But nowhere is this betrayal more chilling than in the story of Keely Bunker, a young woman whose life ended under eerily similar circumstances. Like Claudia, she was betrayed on a night meant for celebration, by the very people she trusted most. Back in September 2019, 20-year-old Keely was simply walking home after what should have been a normal night out, but she never returned. Her body was later discovered, partially concealed beneath branches near a quiet pool at Wigginton Park. It's a case that forces you to question everything you thought you knew, and how quickly the people you trust can turn into the very danger you never saw coming. Keely Bunker was born in 1999 in Tamworth, England. From the very beginning, she was surrounded by love. Her parents, Debbie and Christopher Bunker, adored her, cherishing every moment with their daughter. Keely also had two younger siblings whom she practically helped raise. She wasn't just their big sister, she was their protector, their role model, the one who always checked in and made sure everyone else was okay. She was stunning, with long chocolate brown hair, striking brown eyes, and a petite yet strong figure. Her smile was unforgettable, genuine, warm, the kind that made you feel like everything was going to be all right. She often said she wanted to be a mother one day, at least 3 kids, and anyone who saw her with her siblings and younger cousins knew she would have been amazing at it. By the time she turned 20 in early September 2019, Keely's life was full of promise. She had just landed an interview for a teaching assistant position at her former primary school. It was a Wednesday, and her big job interview was scheduled for the next afternoon, but she wanted to celebrate. The plan was simple: attend a rap concert in Birmingham and maybe go dancing afterward. After the concert ended around 10 p.m., they weren't ready to call it a night. They headed to Snubs, a popular nightclub nearby. At some point, a familiar face joined them: Wesley Street. Keely had known him since they were kids. Wesley had a way of turning up anywhere, blending in effortlessly. He seemed harmless. From the outside, nothing appeared off. 3 young people out celebrating, dancing, laughing, but one detail would become significant later. Wesley had been drinking heavily. According to her friend Monique, he was by far the most intoxicated of the 3. During the taxi ride home, Wesley became so sick they had to pull over so he could vomit. A bystander later described him as 9 out of 10 drunk, practically wasted. Despite that, the group eventually returned to Monique's apartment. Monique begged her to stay the night. It was late, around 4 in the morning, and her interview wasn't until 2 in the afternoon. But Keely was stubborn. She wanted her bed, her space. She insisted she'd be fine walking home with Wesley. "I've got Wes," she told her friend confidently. "I'll be fine." It was the kind of reassurance you give when you truly believe nothing bad can happen. They hugged, and Keely and Wesley walked off together into the early morning, unaware of the danger that awaited. But by the next day, unease had already begun to creep in. Monique sent Keely a Snapchat, no response. That was unusual. When Keely missed her job interview, that worry turned into full-blown panic. This wasn't like her. She was responsible, reliable. Monique immediately reached out to Keely's family. At first, they assumed maybe she had stayed the night after all. But as they realized Keely hadn't come home, alarm bells began to ring. Keely was reported missing that same day. The police acted fast, retracing her steps. At the top of that list was Wesley, the last person to be with her. But when Wesley began answering questions, things quickly grew strange. He told police he had walked Keely most of the way home, then left her near a phone booth because he felt sick. His story kept changing. Did he throw up before getting home or after? Did he wait for Keely to enter her house? Why did his story change each time? Monique noticed scratches on Wesley's face, marks that hadn't been there the night before. That, combined with his shifting story, was enough for her to realize he wasn't just hiding something, he was lying. Meanwhile, Keely's family and friends had already begun searching on foot. Then, around 9 p.m. that night, everything changed. A scream pierced the quiet. Her uncle Jason Brown had found her. Keely Bunker, just 20 years old, was lying face down in a shallow stream, partially hidden beneath a tangle of branches. The scene was horrifying. Her leggings were pulled down and caught on her shoes. Her long brown hair was tangled in branches. Her lower lip was torn, and bruises covered her face. forehead, and neck. The autopsy would reveal more than 100 injuries across her body, including deep internal bruising and hemorrhaging around her mouth. The cause of death was clear. Keeley had been strangled. There was no evidence of a fall, no head trauma, no accident. This was murder. The forensic report confirmed the worst fears. Keeley had been sexually assaulted before she was killed. She had been killed by someone she knew, and all eyes turned to Wesley Street. When police cross-referenced his GPS data with CCTV footage, the timeline was undeniable. Cornered, Wesley changed his story again. He claimed they had been flirting, that she had consented to sex, and that he had accidentally put his forearm over her neck and didn't realize she had stopped breathing. But Keeley's autopsy told a very different truth. Her body bore scratch marks across her neck, defensive wounds. She had fought for her life. Friends confirmed what the evidence suggested. Keeley never saw Wesley in a romantic way. To her, he was like a brother. CCTV footage reinforced this. Keeley could be seen brushing him off when he tried to put his arm around her. It wasn't playful teasing. It was a clear boundary. Yet Wesley continued twisting the story, desperate to shape it in his favor. He wanted to appear clumsy, misunderstood. For 4 different stories in total, all lies, all attempts to keep himself out of prison. Investigators had the proof they needed. Keeley's DNA was found on Wesley's clothing. Her makeup smudged his jacket. His debit card was discovered near her body. Everything pointed to him. In court, the prosecutors didn't hold back. They laid out every detail, the timeline, the injuries, the lies. They showed the jury how Wesley had transformed from a party companion to a predator in just a few hours. They argued that when Keeley said no, Wesley didn't stop. He overpowered her, and when she fought back, he killed her. During sentencing, Keeley's family gave their victim impact statements. Her mother, Debbie, spoke of the unbearable agony. "We will never forgive, never forget. Our home is broken. Our lives are shattered. We miss her so much it hurts to breathe." But perhaps the most powerful part of Keeley's legacy was the change it inspired. For years in the UK, men accused of killing women during sexual activity could claim it was rough sex gone wrong. In 2021, the UK Parliament passed the Domestic Abuse Act. Part of that law was a direct response to cases like Keeley's. The new legislation clearly states that a person cannot consent to serious harm, especially when it results in death. Keeley's name was invoked during parliamentary debates. In a way, even in death, Keeley was protecting others just as she had always done in life. It is a terrifying thought that sometimes the people we feel safest with are the ones we need to watch most closely. The betrayal of a friend, a neighbor, or a family member strikes at the very core of our security. But what happens when that betrayal comes from a complete stranger, a shadow lurking in the periphery of your life, watching, waiting, and then striking with a savagery that defies comprehension?